When the University of Northern Colorado made the transition from Division II to what was then known as D1AA, what would later become FCS, the football program was one that had experienced a sustained period of success. They were Division II National Champions in 1996 and 97 and had won 12 games in 2002. Now, 20 years after playing their first game at the FCS level, the team is in the doldrums. Irrelevant on the field, anonymous in its own community, Northern Colorado is in the worst possible place a college football playing school can be. That is me. Like an idiot, I did not turn on my microphone for this stand-up at Nottingham Field, home of the Bears. If you could hear me though, I would be saying something along the lines of just how sad the entire situation is. A football program that trudges along losing games at an alarming pace with little fanfare. The thing is, I have a great deal of respect for Northern Colorado as a university. The campus is pretty nice, and in my travels, I have crossed paths with far more UNC students and alumni than I would have ever anticipated growing up. They are some of the coolest, smartest, most grounded folks I have ever encountered. They all also share one thing in common: a complete and thorough indifference to athletics at their school. Hell, half the student body on campus right now probably doesn't even realize Northern Colorado has a football team. As for Greeley itself, well, I've said it before on this channel and I'll say it again, this South Park clip sums it up better than I ever could.
Your foster home is here, pretty much the exact opposite of Hawaii.
Greeley exists in the shadow of Colorado's far more interesting places. The town also has a smell that should be mentioned. It's actually not as bad today as it was when I first visited in 2009, but the stench does tend to linger from time to time, even today, due to the city's meat processing plant. Perhaps the only thing that stinks worse than Greeley itself are the UNC Bears football team. As of this video, Northern Colorado has won 50 games over 21 seasons since moving up to Division I AA FCS in 2004. That number, though, shrinks to 44 wins if you remove victories against Division II programs. In 2003, the Bears won 9 games playing as a Division II independent while they were doing their whole transition thing. It would take them the next 5 seasons to reach 9 wins in total. There have been 2 0-win seasons, 4 1-win seasons. Only twice has the school finished above 500 at the FCS level, and both times the record was 6-5. The lows are rock bottom, and even the highs still seem kind of low. The prolonged uncompetitive spell as an FCS football program has led to some supporters calling on the school to return to Division II, where they were once a more respectable force, especially since Colorado has quite a few other schools playing football at that level. Of course, things are not as simple as simply dropping classification. It would impact the entire athletic department and school as a whole. There is also no guarantee that a few seasons of winning at the Division II level would lift the football team out of the purgatory it finds itself stuck in behind the Denver Broncos, Colorado Buffaloes, Colorado State, Air Force, and even Wyoming. To better understand the situation, it is important to understand just how Northern Colorado found itself in this position. That begins with the move from Division II to D1AA, which took place in 2004. The build-up to the jump is often one that gets misrepresented. You'll hear in some circles that the school did not have a plan to move up. In reality, the school had a plan, but those became rushed due to forces outside of its control. According to former UNC President Hank Brown and Athletic Director Jim Fallis, discussions about transitioning to Division I AA began as early as the late 1990s. When Brown was replaced by Kay Norton in 2002 as president, the situation was rapidly changing. The conference it called home, the North Central Conference, was in a state of flux. Both North Dakota State and South Dakota State were actively looking to move up around this time. If that were to happen, it was widely assumed that North Dakota and South Dakota would eventually join them, leaving the NCC with 5 schools. It took a few years, but that very scenario is the one that happened to play out. The NCC would fold after the 2007 season, so in some regard, UNC was correct in thinking they needed to make a move. Now, some have argued the school should have stayed at the Division II level and simply moved over to the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference. However, they didn't necessarily want the Bears, who boasted a larger enrollment than most of the other programs in the RMAC. Nor did Northern Colorado find the fit with the conference and those other schools to be all of that great. If you zoom out and look at the big picture, UNC has far more in common with Colorado and Colorado State than those smaller Colorado schools playing football at the Division II level. The decision to take a step up made sense, but UNC's plan to transition to D1AA was ultimately sped up as well, and the biggest casualty in all of this would be the football program. Head coach Joe Glenn turned the Bears around during the 1990s, winning back-to-back national championships and reaching the D2 playoffs 7 times. He left to take the Montana job and was replaced by Kay Dalton. He had spent the past 11 seasons as the Bears' offensive coordinator and was seen as a safe pair of hands. Dalton was also 68 when he took the job. No one envisioned him as the person to lead UNC football during its transition from D2 to D1AA when he was hired. But when the timeline to move was pushed up, he was just sort of there along for the ride. Having a new coach come in trying to guide the program through the transition would just not have been a good idea. To that extent, the original plan at Northern Colorado would have been for Dalton to retire in 2004-2005, a new coach to come in and be in charge for a couple of Division II seasons, and then the program completes its transition by the end of the decade. When it appeared as if the Dakota schools were taking action, UNC had to be even faster because their other options were stick around D2 and watch their conference fall apart, or potentially have to deal with a coaching change during the transition from Division II to Division I. And thus, the Great West Football Conference was born. Wanting to get a head start on the move up, UNC withdrew from the NCC and played their final D2 campaign in 2003 as an independent. In 2004, they linked up with both Dakota schools as well as UC Davis, who was moving up as well, and Cal Poly, a D1AA football independent, to create this football-only Great West Conference. For UNC, they went 2-9 and 4-7 in their transition seasons of 2004 and 2005. However, upon the completion of the 2005 campaign, Dalton wasn't ready to ride off into the sunset just yet. That was problematic. The administration had assumed that the old-timer would get them through the hard part of the move, and then they could give him the old golden watch for these efforts and bring in a fresh face. The Colorado coaching legend had other ideas and still felt as if he could do the job. When the Bears athletic director at the time, Jay Heinrichs, told Dalton he could resign or be fired, he chose the latter. It was not a good look then and has aged extremely poorly. In 6 seasons at the helm of Northern Colorado, Dalton had 3 seasons with a winning record. They've had 2 since. It was not all bad news though. The Bears were accepted into the Big Sky Conference, who had coveted a 9th member. That stability would be useful moving forward. All the school needed to do was hire the right head coach for the football team, and they'd be off to the races. Scott Downing was the man tapped to lead Northern Colorado into this brave new world, and the hire did kind of make sense on the surface. He had spent a large part of his coaching career working at both Nebraska and Wyoming, so it wasn't as if he was a complete stranger to the region. The reality of the situation was that not even the best made plans would have been able to overcome the sheer awfulness that was Downing's coaching tenure. The school's football team is probably still best well known for a 2006 incident when the Bears' backup punter stabbed the starter in a case that would receive national attention. The Bears actually went on to win the game after the backup punter was arrested for the stabbing and details of the incident came to light. The victory would happen at Texas State, a program that had advanced to the D1AA playoff semifinals the previous season. Northern Colorado would then go 3 years before winning another road game under Downing. And while the stabbing incident would reverberate around the country, this was not the only black eye the program suffered during that first season. Assistant coaches at UNC were suspended, and one even resigned after it came out they had organized an unauthorized spring practice. Multiple players were suspended for off-campus incidents during 2006. UNC was bad on the field, yet somehow worse off it. You could have made a very strong case that UNC should have just moved on from him after that first 1-10 season. The following 1-11 campaign, not to mention all of the off-field noise, certainly warranted his termination after year 2. Yet somehow, someway, Downing held on to this job for 5 seasons. Worst of all, after winning 3 games in the 4th and final year of his original contract, UNC power brokers somehow convinced themselves that he was turning the ship around and gave him a 1-year contract extension. This is a coach who had won 6 games in 4 seasons, and For whatever reason, he got another bite at the apple. Of course, Downing would be willing to work for peanuts, and that was kind of important to the school. Northern Colorado was facing a university-wide cash crunch, and the athletic department was spending more money due to the increased number of sports and scholarships, as well as improving facilities, and they simply could not afford to fire Downing during those first 3 seasons when he was just stinking up the joint worse than, well, that Greeley meat processing plant. And paying him a below market rate for a 5th year after showing quote unquote progress in year 4 was the most affordable option. Downing did win another 3 games in 2010, but the UNC administration just could not justify keeping him around any longer. His record of 9 wins and 47 losses was sad. His sticking around for 5 years set Bears football back immensely, especially considering that both South Dakota State and North Dakota State would reach the playoffs before he'd be shown the door. In his place came Ernest Collins Jr. from Alcorn State. He'd played defensive back at Northern Colorado and also spent some time as an assistant coach in Greeley under Dalton. The thing is, if Downing pushed people away from UNC football, Collins made sure they stayed away during an unmemorable 9-year run. That is probably a bit harsh on a coach who did the best he could with what he had. After going winless in his first season, Collins notched 5 victories in 2012, the school's most in a season since 2003. They were also back-to-back 6-5 teams in 2015 and 2016. However, Collins would finish with 3 wins or fewer in 6 seasons. The Bears were good, just not good enough to be interesting. Making matters worse, they had become even more of an afterthought among the student body, local community, and the state of Colorado as a whole. Understanding this, UNC officials seemed determined to make a splash with their next football hire. Having spent the first 14 seasons as an FCS school playing under head coaches who were either not very good or pretty boring, the school knew it needed something different, something that would garner the attention of everyone, and that something would be Ed McCaffrey. 9 months before Jackson State would hire Deion Sanders, Northern Colorado announced the former Broncos wide receiver as their next head coach. It was a pretty big story that created some much needed positive energy around the program. McCaffrey had enjoyed some success as a high school coach in the state, and the hope was this would translate to the next level. Then the pandemic hit. With the fall season canceled and UNC not opting to play in the Big Sky's spring season, it would be 21 months before he coached his first game at the school. When McCaffrey finally took to the sidelines for the Bears, he made the one mistake every college football coach in the state of Colorado should know better than to make. He started his son at quarterback. Hawkins' family is still a trigger for many CU Buffs fans, and that whole episode of nepotism almost caused the state to spontaneously combust back in the day. But if that wasn't bad enough, Ed McCaffrey took things a step further by hiring his son Max as wide receivers coach. Max, by the way, was serving a 10-game NFL suspension for what was believed to be a performance-enhancing drugs violation at the time he was hired. Just maybe not the guy you'd want around college athletes. Just saying. Somehow, things got more ridiculous. So, Ed is the head coach, Dylan McCaffrey is the starting quarterback, and then, ahead of the 2021 season, Max McCaffrey is promoted to offensive coordinator despite having never coached a game for the school, or ever for that matter. Also, at some point during the timeline, Max's girlfriend was hired as director of operations for the UNC football team, creating a massive conflict of interest. Hawkins's eat your heart out. Despite all its McCaffrey backing, the Bears' offense in 2021 was truly awful. They averaged 14.9 points per game, which placed them 118th out of 128 FCS programs. That average is propped up by the 45 points they scored against Houston Baptist, a school that would finish the season 0-11. UNC only scored more than 20 points once more outside of the Houston Baptist game. They finished dead last in the Big Sky in yards and several other offensive categories. Any buzz Ed McCaffrey coaching in Greeley was extinguished about midway through that first season. Somehow, though, things were even worse off the field. In a Greeley Tribune article published shortly after the 2011 season ended, a culture of dysfunction, deceit, and ineptitude was laid bare by former players. Ed McCaffrey and his staff were dishonest about partial scholarships. Many of the coaches lived in Denver and weren't even commuting to the school on most days, and they weren't preparing scouting reports on their opponents. These are just a few of many issues, by the way. Despite all of that, though, the family decided to run it back in 2022, essentially as is. Things went about as you'd expect. Northern Colorado opened the season with an embarrassing loss to the previously 0-11 Houston Baptist at home, in which they trailed 32-14 heading into the fourth quarter. They closed the season 1-7 and failed to score more than 21 points in their final 6 contests. Given UNC's track record of providing underperforming coaches with a very long runway, the prevailing thought process would be that Ed McCaffrey would see out his 5-year contract or at least make it through year 4. Surprisingly, that didn't happen. It turns out Ed McCaffrey was just a huge liability. Very little changed on or off the field, and the school realized it couldn't have a head coach who was there to cash paychecks and provide benefits to his family and their partners. If Northern Colorado is taking decisive action to fire a football coach, you can be rest assured things were extraordinarily bad. Northern Colorado would go in the complete opposite direction with its next football coach. Ed Lamb was chosen to replace McCaffrey, and honestly, this is a good hire. Lamb had experience building Southern Utah into a decent FCS program before becoming associate head coach at BYU, a position he would hold for 7 seasons. Unfortunately for Lamb, he inherited a program that had been parted out and placed on blocks. There was no infrastructure and little worth saving at Northern Colorado post McCaffrey. Lamb went 0-11 in 2023 and is 1-7 so far this season, albeit that win did come against a ranked Weber State side. It will take years for the head coach to turn UNC around, and even then, who actually knows if it's even possible? That victory against Weber State, though, highlights perhaps the oddest thing about the story of Northern Colorado football at the FCS level. They seem to be close every season. It feels like the Bears lose multiple one-score games or hang tough against ranked FCS opponents or maybe even cause an upset. You think they could be close to turning it around, but they never do. Progress, or even the hope of progress, is followed by steps backward almost immediately. Hope appears so close, only for regression to come along and pull the Bears back to their sad reality. Some fans want Northern Colorado to drop back down to Division II. Others boldly wish to move up to FBS, seeing that as the only way to save them from what has become a nightmare stint in FCS. The reality, though, football is probably not an important component of UNC's athletic department. Being Division I in other sports is what has actually mattered. Northern Colorado's volleyball team is the best in the Big Sky Conference, and this year managed to beat Colorado, Colorado State, Air Force, and Denver. That's a hell of a sweep. Women's soccer has appeared in the NCAA tournament. Both men's and women's golf have won conference titles. Women's basketball reached the NCAA tournament in 2018 and has a few WNIT appearances. And while men's basketball had to vacate its Big Sky Championship and subsequent NCAA tournament appearance, the Bears did win the CIT in 2018. One of the best stories, though, has to be the pride of Greeley, Tad Boyle, managing to turn things around with the Bears basketball team that had just completed the Division I transition. In doing so, he got the attention of Colorado in the process and secured his dream job with the Buffaloes. None of that happens if UNC stays in Division II, and none of that happens if the Bears don't have a football program. That is what got them an invite into the Big Sky Conference to begin with. Quite frankly, I don't think anyone envisioned just how poorly the football team's move up would go. A lot of it was self-inflicted wounds, and some of it was just unfortunate circumstances. Had Northern Colorado had a few more years to formulate a transition plan from Dalton to a new head coach before moving up, or had they had the money to fire Downing after any of those first 3 one-win seasons, maybe the Bears' story is different. Maybe they aren't a college football program stuck between Irrelevance and Anonymity. If Big Sky teams like Sac State and Portland State can reach the FCS playoffs, there's no reason it can't happen here in Greeley too. Then again, maybe we're all focused on the wrong aspect of the Bears' story. It's a shame the football program has been so bad for so long, but sometimes the battle is simply existing.
I don't know what the future holds for Northern Colorado football. Do they go back to Division II? Do they stay FCS? Maybe they even get that mythical FBS invite given all of the uncertainty surrounding the sport. What I do know is that this remains an excellent college football experience, one you can see, you can touch, you can get right up on the edge of the field and be a part of for yourself. Do the Bears have the best fan base, the most fans? No, they do not, but they still offer something that's very important in college football, opportunities, and just the ability for local communities like Greeley to come out and support a local team. That does it for me here in Greeley. I've got the rest of the game to watch. So until next time, I'm Shane Hollis. This is the Touchback. Hashtag take it out to the 25 and hashtag Vamoose Os Os. Go UNC!